and Hetfield simply favored James's guitar. And to be fair to them, Newsted has in subsequent years admitted that oftentimes on that album, he followed James's guitar parts too closely, rather than playing a more unique bass line, a mistake he would not make again. Hetfield himself has also recently added to this story, arguing that some of the questionable mixing was due to the band's hectic schedule at the time. You see, in addition to never taking time to, grieve following Cliff's death, they also really didn't take time to finish the album before heading off on the road again. As during the time when they were mixing Justice, Metallica was also performing on the aforementioned Monsters of Rock tour, and in between shows they would fly back to the studio to work on the album's mix. According to Hetfield, then, they were mixing Justice with ears that were still wrecked from playing a gig, making it so they felt it necessary to turn the highs up just so they could hear them, and according to Hetfield, both him and Lars were just too burned out at the time to think about what these choices meant for the big picture, all of which are at least somewhat reasonable explanations. That being said, Jason has also stated in the past that he believes his playing style was bothersome for the pair, as it was a reminder that Cliff wasn't there anymore. Basically then, whether conscious of this or not, since Newsted didn't play like Cliff and he wasn't adding the same texture to the music, it bothered the pair of them, and so they turned it down. As a result, in subsequent years, fans have made their own edits and remixes of the album, with And Justice for Jason being the most well-known. However, that version in particular doesn't really fix the problem, as it's just laying the bass parts over the top of the rest of the album, so it doesn't sound like a cohesive whole by any stretch, which is why I much prefer the version done by James Mason, who notes that to make everything work with James's guitar sound intruding on the bass frequencies, he fit Jason in by cutting the low end and boosting the mids of his bass so that he fit in where the guitar tone was scooped. This version of the album is available on YouTube, which I will provide a link for with my sources. Now, with all that being said, I think in certain ways And Justice for All is Metallica at the peak of their abilities, with its complex structures and technically challenging and interesting music. That being said, if pressed to say which Metallica album is the best, I still keep going back to Master of Puppets, since it's just a more consistent album with generally better songs from front to back. While Lightning, Puppets, and Justice each feature some of Metallica's best songs, at the end of the day, in my opinion, there are a couple of songs on both Lightning and Justice that just aren't quite as good as the rest. Not saying that they're bad songs or that I skip over them when I listen to these albums, it's just that both albums feature some of the best songs the band ever produced, but there are also songs on those albums that, for me at least, just don't rise to those same levels. Again, though, it can't be denied that Metallica during this span of their careers produced what, in my opinion at least, are three of the finest heavy metal albums ever. Some even include their debut Kill 'Em All in this stretch, but I don't, simply because I feel that Lightning was such a huge leap in terms of quality and songwriting that I like to differentiate the two. Ultimately, And Justice for All would be released on the 7th of September 1988. No, this number apparently comes from Metallica themselves, as for some reason multiple dates exist both online and in various publications for its release. How this is possible, I have no idea. Regardless, like Master of Puppets, Justice would go platinum, except it would manage to do so in just 9 weeks, as opposed to the 18 months it took for Master to hit that mark. Although I suspect it might have been even quicker, since this might be based off the RIAA dates, who had the album being released several weeks earlier in the end of August, a date which again the band themselves, who are pretty good at keeping records, insist is wrong. Regardless though, the album was hugely popular, especially considering how heavy and technical it was, as it peaked at number 6 on the Billboard charts, and even made it to number 4 in England. Metallica then had proven they could be successful without having to compromise and play the typical music business game. Indeed, even when they chose to make their first ever music video, they chose a song that really in no way matched the kind of song that would normally get played on radio and MTV. To begin with, most singles, songs that get played on such outlets, are 3 to 4 minutes long at most. One, though, clocks in at well over 7 minutes long. In terms of making it into a video, though, one was the perfect choice to get such a treatment, since the author of Johnny Got His Gun, Don Trumbo, after being driven out of Hollywood during the McCarthy era, would return to direct the film based upon his book, a film that had been released in 1971 during the height of the Vietnam War, but then was largely forgotten about, a situation which allowed the band the opportunity to purchase the rights to the film so they could use portions of it in their video. As a result, the video had this ominous stark black and white look to it so as to match the original film, a look that provided a total contrast to the bright and flashy videos that normally populated MTV's airways. Despite this, or maybe because of it, one quickly became the #1 most requested video on MTV following its premiere on the 22nd of January 1989. For most of Metallica's fans then, this wasn't the band compromising, but instead choosing to only play the game by their own rules. One then went on to become the first Metallica single to break into the top 40 in the US, which garnered the band the attention of the Grammys, as they became the first unquestionably metal band to be invited to play on the show, as they performed a 5-minute edited down version of the song. Yet, despite this appearance, the Best Hard Rock/Metal Performance Award that year infamously went to the distinctly unheavy metal Jethro Tull for their Crest of Knave album, which, in my opinion, after listening to it, was not only not even remotely heavy metal, but also not a particularly great outing from that band in general. Granted, it's been a minute since I listened to it when I was doing the episode on Aqualung, but my lasting memory of the album is just how dated it sounded with all the very 80s sounding synth on it. That being said, the members of Jethro Tull had a much higher opinion of the album than I do, and yet they still did not seem to think they were going to win the award, and as such did not bother to attend the ceremony. Metallica, though, would look to capitalize on this disappointment by mocking the award show by placing a sticker on future copies of the album, proudly declaring that they were Grammy Award losers. Pointless awards aside, and Justice for All is the album that made the members of Metallica millionaires. This success, though, also had its consequences, as during this period both Lars and Kirk started using cocaine fairly heavily, a habit they really seemed to have picked up during the Monsters of Rock tour, as they appeared with bands like the Scorpions and Van Halen, groups that were infamous for their intake of the aforementioned drug. Meanwhile, James Hetfield's drinking also got really heavy during this time, which, as much as anything else, seems to be the product of their unresolved grief relating to Cliff's death, as, according to Kirk Hammett, quote, "There was so much anger because of Cliff's death. That kicked the drinking up 2 or 3 notches. Between 1987 and 1990, we were raging alcoholics." Still, these personal issues aside, Metallica's uncompromising, high-speed, progressive, and highly technical style had unexpectedly brought them into the mainstream consciousness of the American public. Yet, despite this success, and Justice for All would also mark an end of an era for Metallica. Some of this might have been due to Ulrich's desire to capitalize on their success and his love of Guns N' Roses. That being said, the band themselves attribute their change in direction to the level of concentration and difficulty they experienced playing their latest batch of songs live. Indeed, Hetfield has come to hate the album, feeling they were trying to show off too much. The band has also claimed that the audiences for their Damaged Justice tour did not seem to be as into their newer, longer songs. Now, how accurate this assessment was and what the reason for this alleged lack of response was, I cannot say. Regardless, the feeling among the band, or at least among the 2 most important members of the band when it came to making such decisions, was they had to do something different the next time around, with James and Lars both apparently deciding they wanted to write shorter, more to-the-point songs. That all being said, the most important part of this change I still think goes back to the death of Cliff Burton, which is not a new take by any stretch of the imagination. The thing is, you can't look at the band, their trajectory, and the way they talk about Cliff and not think about what they would have done had he been around. Now, chances are they probably still switch gears following an album like Justice, where they really push the envelope in terms of complexity and technicality. The unanswerable question, though, is what path they would have gone down instead with Cliff's influence, as I doubt the guy who partially chose to leave his old band to join Metallica because he felt they were going too commercial would have had nothing to say about the direction they went in for the Black Album and beyond. As while I will contend those albums get unfairly judged in some circles, I still wish we could have gotten the chance for the man responsible for creating Orion to continue to guide Metallica's career.
Thank you for listening to Distorted History. If you would like to help out, please rate and review the podcast and tell your friends if you think they'll be interested. If you're feeling especially generous and would like to help keep this podcast going, please consider visiting my Ko-fi page at ko-fi.com/distortedhistory and donating a few bucks. Anything you can give is greatly appreciated. I will be posting updates on future episodes and sources there in addition to posting them on Twitter as I usually do. With all that being said, once again, thank you for listening, and until next time.